Why is it that in this state, an entire town was once erased off the map to make a drinking fountain for Boston? Yet people still believe a wealthy slave trader's mansion is somehow called the Cradle of Liberty. Welcome to 71 Most Outrageous Historical Lies Perpetuated by Small-Town Historical Societies, where we are exposing the wildest cover-ups, like the time a flood of molasses killed 21 people in the streets of Boston and a 4-year-old girl was thrown in jail for being a witch. Alongside the myths you still believe, like thinking Paul Revere actually finished his famous midnight ride, or that Thoreau survived alone in the woods without his mommy doing his laundry. We are proving which insane stories are real history and which are just colonial-era lies. Your small town. Historical Society has been selling on souvenir mugs for 200 years, so hit that subscribe button before we reveal the truth. 1. Plymouth Rock sits in Massachusetts like a sacred American relic, but the truth behind it is hilariously embarrassing. The rock was not identified as the Pilgrim's landing spot until 1741. That is over 120 years after the actual landing. The man who pointed it out was a 94-year-old elder named Thomas Faunce, who claimed his father told him about it. His father was not even on the Mayflower. Locals gathered as this ancient gentleman dramatically pointed at a random boulder. Tourists today still kiss it, believing the legend planted by one chatty grandpa. 2. Every Halloween Americans picture Salem witches burning at the stake, but Massachusetts never burned a single accused witch. 19 people were actually hanged from a tree on Gallows Hill in 1692. The wildest case belonged to a stubborn farmer named Giles Corey, who refused to enter a plea. The court decided to crush him with heavy stones to force a confession. For 2 agonizing days, townsfolk piled rocks on his chest while he reportedly grunted more weight at his tormentors. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. Tourists today still arrive expecting fiery stake stories and leave confused by rocky reality. 3. The Battle of Bunker Hill is one of the proudest names in American history, but the soldiers were not even standing on Bunker Hill. They were dug in on Breed's Hill right next door. Colonel William Prescott apparently picked the wrong hill in the dark on June 16, 1775. His men sweated all night building fortifications on the smaller mound. By morning, British officers across the harbor squinted in genuine confusion at the misplaced colonials. The name Bunker Hill stuck because it simply sounded grander. Tourists today snap photos at a monument standing proudly on the wrong hilltop entirely. 4. Squanto greeting the Pilgrims in fluent English feels like a Thanksgiving miracle, but his backstory is darker than any pumpkin pie. In 1614, an English captain named Thomas Hunt kidnapped Squanto along with 20 other Wampanoag men. They were dragged across the Atlantic and sold into slavery in Spain. Squanto somehow escaped to England, learned the language, and eventually sailed home years later. He returned to find his entire village wiped out by disease. Then pilgrims showed up acting helpless. Imagine the awkward moment when an indigenous man casually says hello in perfect English to stunned colonists. 5. Every American schoolchild learns. Paul Revere galloped through the night shouting, "The British are coming," but the real story is wildly different. Revere was actually captured by a British patrol partway through his ride near Lincoln, Massachusetts. Soldiers pointed pistols at his head and confiscated his horse. A young doctor named Samuel Prescott, who had joined Revere by chance after visiting his fiancée, actually completed the mission to Concord. Prescott jumped a stone wall and escaped into the woods. Longfellow later wrote his famous poem and completely ignored Prescott because his name simply did not rhyme nicely. 6. Henry David Thoreau is celebrated as the ultimate American hermit, roughing it alone at Walden Pond, but the reality is comically suburban. His famous cabin sat barely a 20-minute walk from downtown Concord. Thoreau frequently strolled into town for dinner parties and gossip with neighbors. Even better, his mother and sisters delivered freshly baked goods and picked up his dirty laundry every single week. Imagine the rugged philosopher of self-reliance handing over socks to mom. Visitors today tour the replica cabin, imagining wilderness solitude while ignoring the donuts and clean underwear, quietly powering his entire experiment. 7. Faneuil Hall stands in Boston, proudly nicknamed the Cradle of Liberty, but its origin story is brutally uncomfortable. The building was funded entirely by Peter Fanuel, a wealthy merchant who made his fortune trafficking enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. He donated the hall to Boston in 1742 as a public market and meeting space. Slave auctions were openly conducted on the very steps where revolutionaries later shouted about freedom. Samuel Adams delivered fiery liberty speeches inside, while human beings had been sold outside. Tourists today line up for clam chowder completely unaware of the painful contradiction beneath their feet. 8. The Lizzie Borden nursery rhyme claims she gave her mother 40 whacks and her father 41, but the actual numbers are wildly off. Her stepmother Abby took 19 blows from a hatchet, and her father Andrew received 11. School children have been miscounting brutal axe murders for over a century. Even better, Lizzie was actually acquitted by a jury in 1893. She inherited a fortune, moved into a fancy mansion, and lived comfortably in Fall River until 1927. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The rhyming children apparently never got the memo about her courtroom victory. 9. On January 15, 1919, a giant tank exploded in Boston, unleashing a tsunami of molasses 25 feet tall through the North End. The sticky wave traveled at 35 miles per hour, killing 21 people and injuring 150. Horses got trapped, firefighters drowned, and survivors said the air smelled sweet for decades. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company had been warned the tank leaked badly. Workers painted it brown to hide the drips. A judge finally ruled the company guilty of using cheap substandard steel. Boston Harbor reportedly stayed brown until summer arrived. 10. In the 1930s, Massachusetts officials decided Boston needed more drinking water, so they simply erased 4 entire towns from existence. Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, and Prescott were drowned to create the Quabbin Reservoir. Around 2,500 residents fought the eviction for years, writing furious letters and holding emotional town meetings. Graves were dug up and relocated. Houses were burned or hauled away. On April 28, 1938, the towns officially ceased to exist. Former residents held a heartbreaking farewell ball, dancing one last waltz. Today, fishermen cast lines directly over submerged church foundations and forgotten family cellars below. 11. The Mayflower is celebrated for landing at Plymouth, but the Pilgrims were nowhere near their intended destination. Their official charter sent them to the mouth of the Hudson River in northern Virginia, which today is New York City. Captain Christopher Jones ran into vicious storms and dangerous shoals off Cape Cod. Exhausted and seasick, the passengers begged him to just stop somewhere reasonable. They anchored at Provincetown instead in November 1620. Imagine paying for a luxury cruise to Miami and being dropped off in Maine instead. Plymouth was simply the closest decent harbor across the bay weeks later. 12. Tituba is often depicted in dramatic Salem retellings as an enslaved African woman teaching witchcraft to bored Puritan girls. Historians now believe she was actually Arawak, meaning indigenous South American likely brought to Massachusetts through Barbados. Samuel Parris purchased her years before the trials began. When the accusations exploded in 1692, Tituba shocked everyone by confessing dramatically to flying on poles and meeting a tall man in black. Her wild storytelling probably saved her life since confessors were spared. She vanished from records afterwards sold to pay her jail fees. Hollywood still gets her background completely wrong today. 13. Every American sees Samuel Adams beer in liquor stores and assumes the founding father was a brilliant master brewer. The truth is hilariously sad. Sam Adams was actually a maltster, meaning he prepared grain for other brewers and he was terrible at it. He inherited his father's malt house in 1748 and nearly drove it into bankruptcy within a few years. Customers complained about his lazy bookkeeping and missing inventory. Adams was far better at writing revolutionary pamphlets than counting barley. The modern beer brand launched in 1984 simply borrowed his patriotic face and slapped it onto better-tasting bottles. 14. Lowell, Massachusetts proudly markets itself as the birthplace of empowered American working women, but the reality was brutal industrial servitude. Young mill girls, often as young as 12, worked 73-hour weeks inside thundering textile factories. Doors were frequently locked during shifts, trapping them inside with lint-clogged lungs. Wages were docked for talking, laughing, or even gazing out windows. Boarding house matrons enforced strict curfews and Bible readings every evening. When the girls organized strikes in the 1830s, owners simply replaced them with desperate Irish immigrants. Tourists today admire the brick architecture without imagining the screaming machinery within. 15. Americans grow up reciting 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, picturing Paul Revere watching lanterns flicker from the Old North Church. The lanterns were actually a signal sent by Revere to other riders, not from them to him. Sexton Robert Newman climbed the steeple on April 18, 1775, and briefly hung 2 lanterns indicating the British were crossing by water. The signal was meant to alert patriots across the Charles River in case Revere himself was captured, which is exactly what happened. He arranged a backup plan. School children have been misreading the direction of those famous lanterns for 2 centuries. 16. The Mayflower Compact gets dramatized as a noble document signed at Plymouth Rock, surrounded by waving Pilgrim hats. The actual signing happened aboard the cramped ship anchored off Provincetown weeks before they even saw Plymouth. Passengers were panicking because some non-Pilgrim crew threatened mutiny, saying the Virginia charter was useless this far north. 41 men huddled below deck, arguing furiously about authority. They signed a quick legal compromise on November 11, 1620, just to prevent chaos. Plymouth was not reached until December. School books routinely show them piously signing on dry land with bonnets and buckles. 17. The famous Minuteman statue standing proudly in Concord beside the Old North Bridge is supposed to honor the rugged farmer soldiers of 1775. The sculptor Daniel Chester French faced a small problem in 1874 because no actual Minutemen were available for posing. So French recruited a Harvard student named John Beals, who flexed his arms in the studio holding a plow and musket. Beals was a polished college boy, not a calloused colonial farmer. Tourists today snap reverent photos imagining genuine revolutionary grit. They are actually admiring an Ivy League athlete dressed up for an art project, staring nobly into nothing. 18. Louisa May Alcott wrote, "Little Women," painting a cozy portrait of cheerful sisters living in genteel poverty. Her actual childhood was significantly more brutal. Her father, Bronson Alcott, was a stubborn transcendentalist philosopher who refused to take ordinary paying work, calling it spiritually corrupting. The family bounced between borrowed houses surviving on apples bread and the charity of friends like Ralph Waldo Emerson. Louisa once recalled going to bed weeping from hunger. She started writing pulp thrillers under a pen name just to feed everyone. Bronson, meanwhile, lectured audiences about vegetarian purity while his daughters quietly starved beside him. 19. In 1854, New Bedford, Massachusetts was officially the richest city per capita in America, thanks entirely to whale oil. Mansions multiplied along County Street as captains returned from voyages with barrels of liquid gold. Lamps across the world burned thanks to sperm whales hauled into this small harbor. The dark twist hides behind the glittering wealth. Black sailors made up roughly 20% of crews, yet received drastically smaller shares of profits. Captains routinely cheated them through rigged contracts. Frederick Douglass even worked the New Bedford docks after escaping slavery. He noted bitterly that freedom up north still tasted suspiciously like exploitation. 20. Cotton Mather is often blamed as the snarling villain who ran the Salem witch trials, but he never actually presided over a single courtroom session. Mather was a Boston clergyman, not a judge. He sent detailed letters to the appointed judges urging caution about spectral evidence, which he privately doubted. After the executions ended, however, he wrote a thunderous book in 1693 called Wonders of the Invisible World, defending the convictions. His father, Increase Mather, publicly disagreed. The family arguments around the dinner table must have been spectacularly awkward. Modern Salem tour guides still cheerfully blame Cotton for crimes he merely cheered on afterward. 21. John Hancock's enormous looping signature on the Declaration of Independence is famously credited to defiance. School children are told he wrote it huge so King George could read it without spectacles. The actual reason is hilariously boring. Every single signer on the original parchment wrote their name in similarly grand calligraphic style, because that was simply the formal handwriting convention of 1776. Hancock signed first and largest because he was president of the Continental Congress, meaning protocol demanded prominence. The defiant quote about King George was invented decades later by storytellers. Hancock was simply following etiquette while accidentally creating an American verb forever. 22. Catherine Switzer gets celebrated as the first woman to run the Boston Marathon in 1967, but Bobby Gibb actually beat her by a full year. In 1966, Gibb hid behind a forsythia bush near the starting line, wearing her brother's Bermuda shorts and a hooded sweatshirt. She jumped into the pack of male runners and crossed the finish line in 3 hours, 21 minutes ahead of 2/3 of the men. Crowds cheered wildly as she sprinted past. The Boston Athletic Association still refused to officially recognize her because women supposedly could not run long distances physiologically. 23. The Cape Cod Canal, slicing through Massachusetts, feels like a modern engineering marvel, but the original idea is wildly older. Captain Miles Standish proposed the canal way back in 1623 after pilgrims kept losing trading boats around the dangerous tip of the Cape. Sandbars swallowed ships, and pirates picked off survivors. Standish drew rough sketches showing a shortcut between Buzzards Bay and Cape Cod Bay. Nothing happened for nearly 3 centuries. The canal finally opened in 1914, a full 291 years after Standish's pitch. Imagine waiting almost 300 years for your municipal request to be approved. 24. Americans assume the Mayflower passengers proudly called themselves Pilgrims from the moment they stepped ashore. The actual word was not applied to them as a group until 1820, nearly 200 years after the landing. At the bicentennial commemoration in Plymouth, a famous orator named Daniel Webster delivered a thunderous speech using the term Pilgrim Fathers. The phrase electrified the audience, and journalists splashed it across newspapers. Within months, the label stuck nationally. Before that, they were simply called Old Comers or First Comers or the Forefathers. Webster basically branded an entire founding myth with one dramatic public speech. 25. The Boston Tea Party is dramatized in textbooks, with patriots elaborately disguised as Mohawk warriors, complete with feathers, war paint, and leather. The actual disguises were embarrassingly minimal. Most participants simply smeared coal soot or burnt cork across their faces and wrapped old blankets over their shoulders. A few muttered fake war whoops climbing aboard the ships. Their goal was symbolic deniability, not theatrical accuracy. Witnesses recognized neighbors easily through the grime. One participant later admitted his own wife scolded him at breakfast about the soot stains on her good blanket. Revolution apparently involved a lot of laundry afterward. 26. Emily Dickinson is mythologized as a mysterious recluse, haunting her Amherst bedroom in a white dress whispering to butterflies. The reality is significantly more social. She exchanged over 1,000 surviving letters with friends, editors, family members, and romantic interests across decades. She baked elaborate gingerbread for neighborhood children, lowering treats from her window in a basket. She managed her household's social correspondence, handling invitations, condolences, and gossip with practiced precision. She simply preferred writing to visiting. Calling her a recluse insults a woman who was basically running an analog social network from her writing desk, while everyone underestimated her completely. 27. The USS Constitution proudly floats in Boston Harbor as Old Ironside's the oldest commissioned warship still afloat. The wooden patriotism beneath visitors' feet is mostly an illusion. Only about 10 to 15% of the original 1797 timber actually remains in the vessel today. Every major restoration since the 1870s replaced rotted planks, masts, ribs, and keel sections piece by piece. By the 1990s, even the iconic copper sheathing had been swapped out. Visitors snap photos believing they are touching the deck where sailors fought British frigates. They are mostly touching 20th century lumber, wearing a very impressive historical costume. 28. The first Thanksgiving feast of 1621 is sold to American children as turkey, gravy, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and cranberry sauce passed around a smiling table. The actual menu contained none of those foods. Edward Winslow wrote that the meal featured roasted venison brought by the Wampanoag wild waterfowl, probably ducks or geese cornmeal, porridge, mussels, eels, and lobster. Potatoes had not even reached New England yet. Pumpkin pie required butter and an oven they did not have. cranberry sauce needed sugar nobody could afford. The meal was basically a 3-day woodland barbecue, not a Norman Rockwell painting. 29. Bridget Bishop was the first person executed during the Salem witch trials, hanged on June 10, 1692. For nearly 300 years, historians and tour guides confused her completely with a different woman named Sarah Bishop, who ran a tavern in nearby Beverly. The mistake painted Bridget as a flamboyant red bodice-wearing tavern keeper accused of seducing married men. The real Bridget was a quiet, middle-aged housewife living in Salem town. Historian David Green finally untangled the mess in 1981. Despite the correction, Salem souvenir shops still proudly sell merchandise featuring the scandalous tavern lady, who was actually somebody else entirely. 30. The Battle of Lexington is dramatized as a heroic stand by brave Minutemen facing red-coated British soldiers across a dewy green at dawn. The actual confrontation on April 19, 1775 lasted under 5 minutes. Captain John Parker had only about 70 men lined up loosely, many still rubbing sleep from their eyes. British Major John Pitcairn outnumbered them roughly 10-1. Someone fired a still unidentified shot nobody knows from which side, and chaos erupted briefly. 8 colonists died, 10 were wounded, and the British marched on toward Concord. Calling it a battle was generous wartime marketing by patriot newspapers afterward. 31. Quincy, Massachusetts proudly markets itself as the city of presidents, claiming to preserve John Adams' birthplace exactly as he knew it. The Little Saltbox House has been heavily reconstructed and even physically relocated since Adams toddled around its floors. In the 1890s, preservationists moved the structure off its original foundation, rebuilt rotted walls, replaced the chimney, and added period furniture nobody could prove belonged inside. Adams himself would probably wander the rooms today politely, asking where his actual childhood went. Tourists snap reverent photos of beams and floorboards, mostly installed by Victorian carpenters, trying to imagine a founding father. 32. The word Brahmin conjures images of refined, old Boston families sipping tea in mahogany libraries. The label was actually coined as a sharp insult in 1860 by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Holmes wrote a magazine article mocking the inbred snobbery of certain Beacon Hill clans, calling them the Brahmin caste of New England. He compared them to the priestly elite of India, implying their pretentious heirs hid a thin and exhausted bloodline. The wealthy families were furious at first, then somehow embraced the label as flattering. Within a generation, Boston Brahmin became a badge of honor. Sarcasm completely misfired historically. 33. The Highland Light on Cape Cod proudly claims to be the oldest lighthouse on the Cape, having watched over sailors since 1797. Its current location is wildly different from where it actually stood for 2 centuries. Coastal erosion threatened to topple the tower into the Atlantic by the 1990s. Engineers physically moved the entire 450-ton structure 450 feet inland on giant rails in 1996. Old postcards, plaques, and tourism brochures still mark its previous position. Visitors hike confidently to historical markers, staring at empty grass, while the real lighthouse hums quietly half a football field away. 34. King Philip's War of 1675 is rarely taught in schools, yet it remains proportionally the deadliest war in American history. Wampanoag leader Metacom, whom colonists nicknamed King Philip, launched a desperate uprising against expanding English settlements. The fighting torched 52 towns, wiped out roughly 30% of New England's English population, and killed nearly 40% of the Wampanoag. Metacom was eventually shot, dragged through the woods, and quartered. His head was mounted on a pole in Plymouth, where it stayed for 25 years. Tourists walking modern Plymouth streets have absolutely no idea what once decorated the skyline above them. 35. The Marconi wireless station on Cape Cod boldly advertises itself as the site of the first transatlantic radio transmission from America. The claim falls apart under gentle questioning. Guglielmo Marconi's actual first transatlantic transmission happened back in 1901, going from Cornwall, England to Newfoundland, Canada. The Cape Cod station did not transmit successfully until 1903 from Wellfleet to England. By then, Marconi had already toasted champagne and given interviews about his earlier success. Massachusetts simply hijacked the headline by being loud and patriotic. Visitors today stand on a windswept cliff reading plaques about a milestone that quietly happened somewhere else entirely. 36. The Boston Common is celebrated as America's oldest public park, a green oasis where families picnic and children chase pigeons. For nearly 200 years, it doubled as the city's public execution ground. Until 1817, condemned criminals, pirates, Quakers, and accused witches were hanged from a sturdy elm tree near the Frog Pond. Crowds gathered with snacks, treating executions as weekend entertainment. Vendors sold gingerbread beside the gallows. Famous victims included Mary Dyer, the Quaker activist, hanged in 1660 while reciting prayers. Tourists today spread picnic blankets across grass where thousands once cheered, watching their neighbors die in public. 37. William Dawes rode out from Boston the same April night as Paul Revere, carrying identical warnings to Lexington and Concord. Dawes actually traveled farther, covered rougher terrain, and somehow evaded capture by British patrols. He should be equally famous in American memory, yet almost nobody knows his name. The reason is embarrassingly simple. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote his thunderous 1860 poem, Paul Revere's Ride, and the word Dawes simply did not rhyme nicely with anything. Revere conveniently rhymed with hear, cheer, and fear. A struggling messenger named William got erased from history because his last name lacked poetic convenience. 38. Rebecca Nurse executed during the Salem witch trials on July 19. 1692 was 71 years old when she climbed the gallows. She was also nearly completely deaf. The elderly farmer's wife could barely hear the accusations whispered against her in the crowded courtroom. Witnesses reported her sitting silently while judges roared questions she did not register. When jurors briefly returned a not guilty verdict, accusers screamed and convulsed dramatically, forcing the court to reverse the decision. Nurse simply blinked, confused, unable to follow the chaos around her. 300 neighbors had signed petitions defending her gentle character. Everyone ignored them. 39. Crispus Attucks is widely credited as the first American casualty of the Revolution, killed during the Boston Massacre on March 5, 1770. His full story was deliberately minimized for over a century. Attucks was an escaped enslaved man of African and Wampanoag descent, working as a sailor under an assumed name. Newspapers initially reported him simply as a mulatto without naming him. Abolitionists in the 1840s resurrected his memory, transforming him into a black founding martyr. Slaveholding historians fought back, claiming he was just a troublemaker. Boston finally erected a monument in 1888, over a century after he bled out on King Street. 40. Sacco and Vanzetti were executed by Massachusetts on August 23, 1927 for a robbery murder. Almost everyone now agrees they did not commit. The Italian immigrant anarchists faced a notoriously biased trial under Judge Webster Thayer, who privately called them anarchist bastards. Protests erupted across the world from Paris to Buenos Aires. Albert Einstein, George Bernard Shaw, and H.G. Wells signed petitions begging for mercy. Massachusetts ignored everyone and pulled the switch anyway. The state finally exonerated both men in 1977, exactly 50 years too late. Governor Michael Dukakis issued a careful proclamation admitting they had been unjustly convicted. 41. Plymouth Patuxet. The Living History Museum south of Boston rarely tells visitors that the Pilgrims actually banned Christmas. The Puritans considered the holiday a Catholic abomination polluted by drunken pagan revelry. In 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony passed a law fining anyone caught observing Christmas 5 shillings. Workers were ordered to labor normally on December 25th. Plymouth followed similar rules under Governor William Bradford, who scolded young men for playing games instead of working. The ban officially lifted in 1681, but social disapproval lingered for nearly 2 centuries. Tourists today hum carols beside reenactors who would have fined them on sight. 42. The Whydah Galley, discovered off Cape Cod in 1984, remains the only fully authenticated pirate shipwreck ever found in United States waters. Captain Black Sam Bellamy was sailing his stolen treasure ship north along the coast in April 1717 when a savage nor'easter shattered the vessel against the sandbars off Wellfleet. 144 pirates drowned in icy darkness. Only 2 survivors washed ashore and were promptly arrested. The wreck sat forgotten beneath shifting sand for 267 years until explorer Barry Clifford located it. Recovered coins, jewelry, and cannons now fascinate visitors at a Provincetown museum. 43. Beacon Hill. The elegant Boston neighborhood famous for cobblestones and gas lamps takes its name from an actual signal beacon, erected in 1635. The original wooden pole carried a metal bucket of tar that could be lit to warn the colony of invasion. A windstorm finally toppled it in 1789. Citizens replaced it with a stone monument designed by Charles Bulfinch in 1790, which was demolished in 1811 to flatten the hill for development. The current monument standing behind the State House is actually a 1898 replica of the replacement of the original. 3 layers of memorial impersonate one another silently. 44. The Salem Witch House on Essex Street markets itself as the only structure still standing, with direct ties to the 1692 trials. Tourists pay admission, expecting to walk through the actual courtroom where witches were condemned. No trial ever happened inside that building. The house belonged to Judge Jonathan Corwin, who conducted only preliminary examinations of suspects in his front parlor. Formal trials took place at the Salem Town Meeting House, which no longer exists. The marketing carefully blurs preliminary hearing into trial location. Visitors leave, convinced they saw the historic courtroom. They actually toured a judge's living room with creaky floors. 45. The North Bridge in Concord, where Ralph Waldo Emerson immortalized the shot. Heard round the world is not the original wooden structure from 1775. The first bridge actually collapsed from rot and flooding in 1788. Concord rebuilt it, then rebuilt it again. The current span standing today was reconstructed in 1956 using modern materials and reinforced concrete pilings hidden beneath rustic-looking timber. Tourists pose dramatically on the planks, imagining colonial musket smoke drifting around their ankles. They are actually standing on a mid-20th century recreation, built mostly for bicentennial preparation. Even the surrounding meadow has been carefully landscaped for photogenic nostalgia. 46. Daniel Shays. A Revolutionary War veteran led an armed uprising of struggling Massachusetts farmers in 1786. The reasons are infuriatingly familiar to modern Americans. Farmers had returned home from the war to find courts seizing their land for debts they could not pay in actual gold or silver. The state had refused to accept worthless paper currency from veterans. Shays gathered nearly 4,000 desperate farmers attacking courthouses and the Springfield Armory. Wealthy Boston merchants funded a private militia to crush them. The rebellion failed but terrified founders so badly that they rushed to draft a stronger constitution the following summer. 47. Sankaty Head. Light on Nantucket proudly markets itself with the word first in numerous brochures and gift shop mugs. Brant Point Light just across the harbor was actually built in 1746, a full 104 years before Sankaty was lit in 1850. Brant Point also holds the distinction of being the second lighthouse ever built in America after Boston Light. Sankaty's promotional team simply emphasizes carefully phrased firsts, like first electrified or first automated. Tourists buy magnets believing they are admiring the island's oldest lighthouse. The truly historic tower sits half forgotten beside the ferry dock, charging nobody admission whatsoever. 48. Nathaniel Hawthorne's gloomy 1851 novel, The House of the Seven Gables, made an actual Salem mansion famous overnight. The real house only had 3 gables when Hawthorne visited his cousin Susanna Ingersoll inside. She simply told him stories about the building's original 7-gable design, which had been partially demolished over the years. Hawthorne never saw 7 Gables in person. After the novel became a bestseller, preservationists restored and added 4 extra gables in 1908 to match tourist expectations. The mansion now displays the imagined architecture rather than the actual one Hawthorne knew. Fiction quietly rebuilt reality for ticket sales. 49. The Wampanoag leader who welcomed the Pilgrims at Plymouth is universally remembered as Massasoit. That word was not actually his name. Massasoit was a title meaning Great Sachem, or Paramount Chief in the Wampanoag language. His actual personal name was Osamequin, which translates roughly to yellow feather. English colonists kept addressing him by his job title rather than his real name, and it permanently stuck in history books. Imagine if future generations referred to George Washington only as President or Mr. Commander. The man who saved Plymouth from starvation has been called by his business card for 4 centuries. 50. Fenway Park's iconic Green Monster. The towering left field wall is sacred to Red Sox fans across America. The wall was not actually green for the first 35 years of its existence. When Fenway opened in 1912, the wall stood plastered with massive paid advertisements for shaving cream, tobacco, gasoline, and local department stores. Players and fans simply called it the Wall. Ownership finally painted it a uniform green in 1947 to reduce visual distractions for batters. The catchy nickname, Green Monster, did not appear in newspapers until the 1960s. Decades of baseball legend grew on top of advertising paint. 51. The Deerfield Raid of February, or October 29, 1704, saw French soldiers and allied Mohawk Abenaki and Wendat warriors descend on the sleeping Massachusetts village before dawn. 44 colonists died, and 112 were marched 300 miles north into Canada through bitter snow. The strangest twist involved Reverend John Williams's young daughter Eunice. After years living among the Mohawk near Montreal, she refused to return home. Eunice married a Mohawk man converted to Catholicism and forgot her English. Her devastated father visited, begging her to come back. She politely declined and lived happily among her adopted people until 1785. 52. Cape Cod is forever associated with pilgrims, but the first European to actually name it arrived 18 years before the Mayflower. English explorer Bartholomew Gosnold sailed into the area in May 1602, commanding the small ship Concord. His crew caught such enormous quantities of codfish in the surrounding waters that Gosnold immediately scribbled Cape Cod onto his charts. He also named Martha's Vineyard after his deceased infant daughter. Gosnold sailed home without establishing any colony, then later helped found Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. He died of malaria there. The Pilgrims simply borrowed his geographic homework 2 decades later. 53. Dorothy Good was only 4 years old when Salem accused her of witchcraft in March 1692. The little girl was the youngest person ever charged in American witchcraft history. Her mother, Sarah Good, had already been arrested as a suspected witch. Interrogators questioned the terrified child for hours until she finally confessed that her mother had given her a small snake familiar. Dorothy was chained inside Boston jail for nearly 9 months while her mother was hanged. When her father finally retrieved her, she had completely lost her mind. He later petitioned the colony for compensation, describing her permanent madness afterwards. 54. The town of Rowley, Massachusetts passed a remarkably grumpy law in 1656, making it illegal for residents to kiss in public on Sundays. The Sabbath was sacred, and Puritan officials decided affectionate behavior offended divine seriousness. Couples caught smooching outside the meeting house could face fines and public shaming. One sea captain named Thomas Kemble was actually prosecuted in 1656 for kissing his own wife on his doorstep after returning from a 3-year voyage. The court was unmoved by his romantic reunion. The law technically remains on the books today, never officially repealed by any subsequent Rowley Town Council vote. 55. The Seamen's Bethel Chapel in New Bedford features rows of marble cenotaphs honoring whalers lost at sea. Herman Melville visited the chapel in 1840 before signing aboard a whaling ship himself. Those memorial plaques deeply haunted him. When he wrote Moby Dick in 1851, he placed his narrator Ishmael inside the same chapel, staring at identical cenotaphs before sailing on the Pequod. The names, dates, and tragic descriptions in the novel were directly inspired by real lost crews. Visitors today walk through the actual chapel reading the same inscriptions that shaped American literature. Fiction and grief share the exact same wooden pews. 56. Hannah Duston is still honored with a stone statue in Haverhill, Massachusetts, erected in 1879. The plaque celebrates her heroic, 1697 escape from Abenaki captors after they killed her newborn baby during the raid on her town. The statue conveniently omits exactly how she escaped. Dustin grabbed a tomahawk in the middle of the night and killed 10 sleeping captors, including 6 children. She then carefully scalped each corpse to collect the colonial bounty money. The Massachusetts General Court paid her £50 for the scalps. Her statue is technically the first publicly funded monument honoring an American woman. Tourists rarely read closely. 57. On November 18, 1755, a powerful earthquake struck off Cape Ann, shaking the entire Massachusetts coastline so violently that brick chimneys toppled across Boston. The shock lasted nearly 4 minutes, rattling church bells in Portland, Maine, and crumbling stone walls as far away as Halifax, Nova Scotia. Modern seismologists estimate the magnitude at roughly 6.3, making it one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded on the United States East Coast. Boston Puritans interpreted it as divine punishment for general moral laxity. Reverend Thomas Prince preached that recent installations of lightning rods had angered God by interfering with celestial wrath. 58. Phyllis Wheatley became the first published black poet in American history when her collection appeared in London in 1773. Her origin story is heartbreaking. She was kidnapped from West Africa around age 7 and sold on the Boston docks in 1761. The merchant family that purchased her named her Phyllis, after the very slave ship that had carried her across the Atlantic called the Phillies. Imagine being permanently labeled with the name of your own kidnapping vessel. She mastered English, Latin, and Greek, within 16 months astonishing Boston intellectuals. George Washington personally invited her to visit his Cambridge headquarters in 1776. 59. Salem finally opened its official witch trials memorial in August 1992, marking exactly 300 years since the executions. Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate, delivered the dedication speech. He warned audiences that ignoring historical injustice always allows it to repeat. The memorial features 20 stone benches, each carved with a victim's name protruding from a low wall along Charter Street. Visitors often stop reading mid-sentence because the inscriptions of innocent protests are deliberately cut off by the stone wall. 3 centuries of silence ended quietly with simple granite. Most of those families had been waiting roughly 10 generations. 60. The Massachusetts state flag, adopted in 1908, still depicts a Native American figure beneath a colonist's raised arm holding a sword pointing down at his head. The motto, written in Latin, translates roughly, "As by the sword we seek peace, but only under liberty." Critics have called this imagery unbelievably tone-deaf for over a century. A formal redesign commission finally convened in 2021 to update the symbolism. The commission produced careful recommendations in 2023, then promptly stalled in bureaucratic limbo. State buildings continue flying the original violent flag. Legislators keep promising changes during election season, then quietly forget afterward. 61. Anne Hutchinson was banished from Massachusetts Bay Colony in November 1638 for the shocking crime of preaching theology while female. The well-educated mother of 15 children held weekly Bible discussions inside her Boston home, attracting crowds of 60 admirers. Governor John Winthrop accused her of disturbing the peace and undermining ministerial authority. Her trial transcript was so embarrassing to Puritan leaders that they suppressed it for nearly 200 years. Hutchinson moved her family to Rhode Island, then later to New York, where she was killed during a 1643 raid. Modern historians finally rediscovered and published her trial in 1856. 62. The Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts collapsed without warning on January 10, 1860, killing roughly 145 workers inside. Most victims were young immigrant women operating the textile machinery on the upper floors. Investigators quickly discovered the owners had known for years that the cast iron support pillars were dangerously defective. The original architect had warned them repeatedly. Owners ignored him to save money. A fire then erupted in the rubble, trapping survivors who burned alive while rescuers begged for axes. The owners faced no criminal charges whatsoever. Workers across New England held angry vigils that historians now consider an early labor awakening. 63. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote The Scarlet Letter in 1850 because he had been humiliatingly fired from his comfortable government job at the Salem Custom House. A new Whig administration purged Democratic appointees in 1849, and Hawthorne lost his salary overnight. He was broke furious and embarrassed in front of his hometown neighbors. His wife Sophia handed him paper and ink, suggesting he finally write something serious. Hawthorne channeled his rage into the novel, writing the manuscript in roughly 6 months. He even mocked his former Custom House colleagues in the introduction. American literature owes its greatest psychological novel directly to petty political revenge. 64. The Sacred Cod. A 4-foot 11-inch wooden carving has hung inside the Massachusetts State House since 1784, honoring the fish that built colonial fortunes. On April 26, 1933, pranksters from the Harvard Lampoon snuck inside, cut the cod down with wire cutters, and smuggled it out in a long flower box. Massachusetts lawmakers panicked, refusing to conduct any official business until the sacred fish returned. State police searched the entire Commonwealth for 2 days. The cod mysteriously reappeared, hanging back in place with a polite note attached. The current cod is actually a replacement carved after the original suffered too much damage. 65. The Great Boston Fire of November 9, 1872, destroyed 776 buildings across 65 acres of downtown, causing 13 people to die and $73 million in damage. The disaster spread so catastrophically because firefighters' horses were sick with equine influenza. Animals across the city were too weak to pull steam engines through the streets. Volunteers tried dragging heavy equipment by hand while flames raced ahead of them. Fire officials had begged the city council for weeks to upgrade water mains and hire backup horses. The council had brushed off every single warning, calling the expenses unnecessary alarmism. 66. Basketball was invented inside a Springfield, Massachusetts gymnasium in December 1891 by a young Canadian instructor named James Naismith. He needed an indoor activity to keep restless students busy during a freezing New England winter. Naismith nailed 2 peach baskets to the gym balcony, wrote 13 simple rules, and tossed a soccer ball into play. The original handwritten rulebook then mysteriously disappeared for over a century. It resurfaced in 2010 inside a private family archive belonging to Naismith's grandchildren. Kansas University purchased the document at auction for $4.3 million, setting the record for sports memorabilia. 67. Boston Latin School proudly markets itself as the first public school in America, founded on April 23, 1635. The phrase public deserves enormous skeptical eyebrows. Boston Latin actually charged tuition fees for the first 154 years of its existence. Only families wealthy enough to pay could enroll their sons. Girls were entirely banned until 1972, over 300 years later. The school finally became genuinely free in 1789 when Boston taxpayers absorbed the cost. The first public claim is technically accurate only by extremely generous definition. Famous alumni include Benjamin Franklin, who dropped out after 2 years. 68. The Massachusetts town of Dudley, founded in 1732, was named after Thomas Dudley, a 4-time Puritan governor of the colony. Dudley openly advocated executing religious dissenters, viewing tolerance as a dangerous moral weakness. He once wrote a chilling poem found in his pocket after death, declaring, "Let men of God in courts and churches watch over such as do a toleration hatch." He helped banish Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams. Modern residents of Dudley today drive past welcoming signs bearing his name without knowing they honor a man who genuinely wanted to hang neighbors for disagreeing about scripture. Historical marketing tends to omit poetry. 69. Martha's Vineyard hosted a remarkable deaf community from roughly 1700 to 1900, concentrated in the small town of Chilmark. A genetic mutation traced back to settlers from Kent, England, caused unusually high rates of hereditary deafness. Roughly 1 in every 150 residents was born deaf. The entire island simply adapted, developing a unique Martha's Vineyard sign language that everyone hearing or deaf learned naturally from childhood. Deaf islanders married, had careers, and participated fully in town meetings. The community gradually faded as outsiders moved in. Researcher Nora Ellen Gross finally documented this nearly forgotten history in her 1985 book. 70. The Mohawk Trail. Winding through western Massachusetts is celebrated as a scenic driving route opened in October 1914. The roadway was actually paved directly over an ancient indigenous trade route used for thousands of years by the Mohawk, Pocumtuck, and Mohican peoples. State engineers simply followed the existing footpath, bulldozing wider and pouring asphalt. Tribal nations were never consulted, compensated, or even formally notified. Tourist plaques along the route cheerfully describe indigenous history in past tense, as if the original travelers had simply vanished. Many descendants still live throughout New England, watching cars speed past their ancestors' footprints daily. 71. The Boston subway opened on September 1, 1897, proudly claiming the title of America's first underground transit system. Workers constructing the original Tremont Street Tunnel ran directly through the central burying ground, established in 1756. Excavators uncovered roughly 900 coffins along with scattered loose bones. Project foremen quietly moved some remains to nearby cemeteries, but many corpses were simply pushed aside or reburied without ceremony beneath the new tracks. Painter Gilbert Stuart, famous for the dollar bill portrait of Washington, rests somewhere down there. Modern commuters tap fare cards above forgotten colonial graves, rattling silently every single day below. And that wraps up 71 of the most outrageous historical lies Massachusetts small-town historical societies have been quietly selling for centuries. So here's the big question for you. Which one of these myths shocked you the most, or did your own hometown sneak something even dumber into the history books? Drop your answer down in the comments because we genuinely read every single one. If you laughed, learned, or yelled at your screen tonight, smash that like button, subscribe to Dumbest Things, and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next ridiculous deep dive. See you in the next one.